Hello, everyone, and good morning. Thanks for joining us today for Sutta Study with Bhante Suddhaso, who you may not have seen for quite some time now, actually. He was on personal retreats, but now he's back and ready to share with us some words of Dhamma on Majjhima Nikaya 46. So if you'd like to follow along, you can find the link to Bhante's translation in the live chat. And if you have questions at any time, feel free to type them in and we'll address them at the end of the talk. So welcome so far to Gita, Jens, Elaine, Michael, Sarah, Liz, and Sienna. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning, and I will pass things over to Bhante Suddhaso.
Tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Good morning, friends. So, as mentioned, we'll be resuming our sutta study with the Mahadhamma Samadhana Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya number 46, the Greater Discourse on Commitments. As usual, I'll read through the sutta and periodically I'll give some explanations. And at the end, I'll answer any questions you have. So please feel free to enter questions at any time and I'll answer them at the end. The sutta begins, "Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the fortunate one was living at Savatthi in Jeta Grove at Anathapindika's monastery. There, the fortunate one addressed the monks. 'Monks, Venerable Sir,' those monks replied to the fortunate one." By the way, just a quick note here on Pali. So the word that's translated as monks in Pali, it's bhikkhavo, which is in the masculine form, but as was pointed out recently, the masculine form is also used to include people of all genders. So don't take this to be referring only to males, but rather he is speaking to whatever monastics happen to be present at the time. So the Buddha says, "Monks, most beings have this desire, this interest, this aspiration. May unwanted, undesired, and unpleasant things diminish, and may wanted, desired, and pleasant things increase." Pretty standard wish. "Monks, for those beings who have that desire, interest, and aspiration, unwanted, undesired, and unpleasant things increase, and wanted, desired, and pleasant things diminish. Monks, what is the reason for that?" In other words, even though most people want to have more pleasant, desirable experiences, they wind up having less pleasant things and more unpleasant things happening. And the monks reply, "Bhante, for us, the fortunate one is the root of the Dhamma, the guide, the reference. Bhante, it would be excellent if the fortunate one would reveal the meaning of this statement. The monks will listen to the fortunate one and remember." And the Buddha says, "Therefore, monks, listen and pay attention well. I will speak." "Yes, Bhante," those monks replied to the fortunate one. This is another thing we see in a few suttas where rather than just launching into a teaching, the Buddha starts by asking a question. And sometimes when he asks that question, then he'll get an answer, and the answer may be accurate, in which case the Buddha approves of it, or inaccurate, in which case he'll correct it. But often the way the monks will reply is with this kind of statement. The monks will reply saying, "Bhante, you're the teacher. We rely on you for these things. Why don't you tell us the answer to your own question?" Which realistically, if the Buddha was asking me a question, I would probably say something similar, like, I'm more interested in hearing what the Buddha has to say, because he's the one who knows, he's the one who understands. So the Buddha says, "Monks, here the uneducated commoner," that's asuttava patujana, "the uneducated commoner, one who does not see noble beings, is not familiar with the teachings of noble beings, has not been trained in the teachings of noble beings, who does not see good people, is not familiar with the teachings of good people, and has not been trained in the teachings of good people, does not know what things are to be engaged in, what things are not to be engaged in, what things are to be participated in, and what things are not to be participated in. Not knowing what things are to be engaged in, what things are not to be engaged in, what things are to be participated in, and what things are not to be participated in. They engage in the things that are not to be engaged in, do not engage in the things that are to be engaged in, participate in the things that are not to be participated in, and do not participate in the things that are to be participated in. As they do this, unwanted, undesired, and unpleasant things increase, and wanted, desired, and pleasant things diminish. For what reason? Monks, this is how it is for one who lacks wisdom. So the Buddha gives a fairly straightforward answer here. It's like, why do things get worse for many people, even though they want things to get better? Well, he says, first off, the basic problem is that they haven't heard the Dhamma. They don't understand the Dhamma. They're not familiar with the principles of what's wholesome and what's unwholesome, of what's good and what's evil. They're not aware of what creates good karma and what creates bad karma. They're not trained in the principles of morality, mental training, and wisdom. So lacking this kind of knowledge, they make bad choices. Choices which maybe seem like a good idea at the time, but which lead to ultimately to harmful results. And the Buddha says this is how it is for one who lacks wisdom. So one who lacks wisdom, they'll make choices that might seem like a good short-term idea, but in the long term get bad results. And he gives the flip side. He says, monks, hear the educated student of noble beings. That's Suttava Arya Savaka. The educated student of noble beings, one who sees noble beings, is familiar with their teachings, has been well trained in the teachings of noble beings, who sees good people, is familiar with the teachings of good people, and has been well trained in the teachings of good people, knows what things are to be engaged in, are not to be engaged in, are to be participated in, and are not to be participated in. So knowing this, they engage in what is to be engaged in. They do not engage in what's not to be engaged in. They participate in the things that are to be participated in and not in the things that are not to be participated in. And as they do so, then unwanted, undesired, and unpleasant things diminish, and wanted, desired, and pleasant things increase. And the Buddha says, for what reason? Monks, this is how it is for one who has wisdom. So this is basically saying the positive side of this, which is those who know the Dhamma, those who are familiar with the teachings of good people, of awakened beings, those who are well trained in those teachings. So also noticing the distinction he makes, it's not enough just to see good people. It's not enough just to learn their teachings. We also have to be well trained in those teachings. So being well trained requires that we make a commitment within ourselves, that we're going to take those teachings seriously and really try to apply them to our own lives. And a willingness to change our behaviors, a willingness to discard behaviors which are unwholesome, a willingness to take on new behaviors which are more appropriate, which are more good, which are more compassionate, which are more beneficial to others as well as ourselves. And a willingness to receive training from others, which for many people is one of the hardest aspects of the practice, is that as we get more and more involved in the Dhamma, then other people will start telling us what they think we should do. And if those other people are more advanced in the practice than us, if their development of morality, concentration, and wisdom is more advanced than ours, then we should seriously consider their advice. We should seriously consider the instructions they're offering, the training that they're giving us. And sometimes that training is not going to be pleasant or comfortable. Sometimes that training takes the form of corrections that we don't want to hear, or pointing out our flaws in a very direct way. Sometimes training can feel a little bit like being jabbed by a needle over and over again. But that's because that needle is pointing exactly at what we need to see, exactly at what we're pretending is not happening. So the sting is that we're not, on some level, we're not quite receptive to the Dhamma. On some level, we're still resisting the Dhamma. And when the training is pointing to that resistance, then it's uncomfortable because it's pointing at something that we're not yet willing to let go of, something that we're still clinging to. It's kind of like when you have a sore on your skin. If you're very careful and nothing contacts it, then it might actually not hurt very much. But if somebody presses against it, then it hurts very strongly. But if somebody presses against healthy skin, it doesn't hurt. There's no problem. So it's the same. If somebody pokes at you and it gets really uncomfortable, really unpleasant, then that might be because what they're poking at is an area where there's still a lot of attachment and defilement. And if there was no attachment and defilement in that area, then it wouldn't bother us. It might even be amusing. So recognizing this importance of being well-trained in the teachings of the noble beings, well-trained in the teachings of good people. So it's taking that training seriously, seeing each engagement that we have with a teacher as an opportunity to see our own blind spots more clearly, to see where we can improve in our practice, knowing that ultimately this is for our own benefit as well as for the benefit of everyone we encounter. So then the Buddha moves into the main theme of the sutta, which is what the title comes from. He says, monks, there are 4 kinds of commitments. What for? Monks, there is a commitment which is unpleasant now and unpleasant in the future. There's a commitment which is pleasant now and unpleasant in the future. There's a commitment which is unpleasant now and pleasant in the future. And monks, there's a commitment which is pleasant now and pleasant in the future. In other words, 4 scenarios divided by 2 sets of 2. So it's either unpleasant now or pleasant now, and either unpleasant in the future or pleasant in the future. And this is a common scheme that we see in the suttas, is a division of 4 situations, 4 scenarios. And the Buddha then will analyze these 4 scenarios in terms of the Dhamma, in terms of how they apply to the teachings of enlightenment. So the first case, how things play out for one who lacks wisdom. He says, monks. So he's going to analyze each of these 4 scenarios for somebody who lacks wisdom. He says, monks, when a commitment is unpleasant now and unpleasant in the future, an ignorant person is not aware of that and does not accurately understand this is a commitment which is unpleasant now and unpleasant in the future. Since they are not aware of that and do not accurately understand it, they engage in it and do not avoid it. As they engage in it and do not avoid it, unwanted, undesired, unpleasant things increase, and wanted, desired, and pleasant things diminish. For what reason? Monks, this is how it is for one who lacks wisdom. I like the punchiness of the Buddha on this one. He's just like, when you do this, bad things happen. This is how it is for one who lacks wisdom. So the Buddha, generally speaking, he doesn't pull his punches. He's just like, wow, this is how it is. Deal with it. Do something about it. Improve yourself. Through knowing these things clearly that we can make progress on the path. Then he says, when a commitment is pleasant now and unpleasant in the future, an ignorant person is not aware of that and does not accurately understand. This is a commitment which is pleasant now and unpleasant in the future. Since they are not aware of that and do not accurately understand, they engage in it and do not avoid it. As they engage in it and do not avoid it, unwanted, undesired, unpleasant things increase, and wanted, desired, and pleasant things diminish. For what reason? Monks, this is how it is for one who lacks wisdom. So both of these 2 first scenarios are the case where something might seem like a good idea now, but produces bad results in the future. So the unwise person goes ahead and does it without reflecting on the future consequences. And next, when a commitment is unpleasant now and pleasant in the future, an ignorant person is not aware of that, etc. Since they are not aware of that and do not accurately understand, they avoid it and do not engage in it. So this is the case where something has good future results. Since they don't understand that it has good future results, they avoid it. They don't practice it. As they avoid it and do not engage in it, unwanted, undesired, unpleasant things increase, and wanted, desired, and pleasant things diminish. For what reason? Monks, this is how it is for one who lacks wisdom. And the final case, when a commitment is pleasant now and pleasant in the future, you would think even an ignorant person would get this one, but not always so. An ignorant person is not aware of that, does not accurately understand. Since they are not aware of that and do not accurately understand, they avoid it and do not engage in it. As they avoid it and do not engage in it, unwanted, undesired, unpleasant things increase, and wanted, desired, and pleasant things diminish. For what reason? Monks, this is how it is for one who lacks wisdom. And then the flip side is for the case of one who has wisdom. So here it's the same set of 4 scenarios, but with the opposite outcome. So for the commitment that's unpleasant now and unpleasant in the future, a knowledgeable person is aware of that. So naturally they avoid it. They do not engage in it. They know that this produces harmful future results, so they don't do it. When something is pleasant now and unpleasant in the future, again, a knowledgeable person avoids it. It might be pleasant now, but they know that it's not worth the future harm that's going to come. For example, when there's a bottle of wine in front of you, the knowledgeable person knows this is pleasant now, but unpleasant in the future. I'm not going to get involved. And the third case, when a commitment is unpleasant now and pleasant in the future, a knowledgeable person knows that, and they engage in it. They do not avoid it. So even though it's not nice here in the present moment, they know that the long-term results are good. So they do it anyway. And finally, when a commitment is pleasant now and pleasant in the future, a knowledgeable person is aware of that, and therefore they engage in it, knowing that it's pleasant both now and in the future. And in each case, the Buddha says, monks, this is how it is for one who has wisdom. Then he goes into a series of examples. And all of these examples are based upon what's called the 10 courses of wholesome conduct, and conversely, the 10 courses of unwholesome conduct. So this is related to the moral principles of Buddhism. So based upon the 5 precepts, as well as extended description of right speech and some elements of right thought as well. So right action, right thought, and right speech, right action, right speech, and right thought. So wholesome conduct by body, speech, and mind. So he says, what is the commitment that is unpleasant now and unpleasant in the future? And he says, here, monks, with displeasure and depression, someone kills living beings. And because of killing living beings, they experience displeasure and depression. With displeasure and depression, they steal, they commit sexual misconduct, they tell lies, they speak divisive speech, they speak harsh speech, they speak useless speech, they covet, they are aversive, and they hold wrong view. And because of doing these various unwholesome things, they experience displeasure and depression. And finally, when they're separated from their body after death, they reappear in deprivation, a bad destination, downfall, in hell. Yes, Buddhism has hell. It's true. Can't get around this one. So this is an interesting case here because this is an example of somebody who engages in a lot of unwholesome conduct. So killing, stealing, lying, craving, holding wrong beliefs, and so on. But in each case, it's an unpleasant activity for them. So an example of this might be somebody who's conscripted into the army. and they're put on the front lines in order to kill other people. And they don't want to do it, but they feel that they're forced into it. They feel that they don't have any choice. So even though it's unpleasant for them, they don't want to do it, it's upsetting for them, they still go about killing other living beings. But that also creates long-term consequences. They experience displeasure and depression on account of being forced to do something which they don't want to do, which is disagreeable to them. And they're incurring a tremendous amount of bad karma. So just because they're being forced into it doesn't change the fact that they're still intentionally killing other living beings. So they still reap the harmful karma, the harmful consequences of that karma. So it's perhaps not as strong. The bad karma is not as strong as somebody who is willfully, personally deciding to go out and joyfully kill living beings, but they're still intentionally killing living beings, and therefore they still receive the harmful consequences of that karma. And the same with the other courses of unwholesome action here. Again, the three modes of physical misconduct, so killing, stealing, and sexual misbehavior. The four modes of verbal misconduct, so lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and useless speech. And then the three modes of unwholesome mental conduct, so coveting, so wanting other people's things, aversion, so holding negativity or ill will towards others, and wrong view. And wrong view is a broad category, but one of the major aspects of wrong view is not believing in moral causality. So believing that there is no such thing as karma, believing that there's no moral causation, that there's no universal consequence to the choices and decisions that we make. That's the most extreme form of wrong view, the rejection of moral causality. So on account of these 10 unwholesome courses of conduct, even though the person is doing it with displeasure and depression, even though they don't like doing these unwholesome things, saying these unwholesome things, thinking these unwholesome things, it still brings the harmful consequences of unpleasant rebirth, arriving at an unpleasant destination. And so the sutta, although the sutta is emphasizing the future life consequences, so having an unpleasant rebirth, elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha also mentions that karma can ripen in this life or in a future life, or in both, actually. So you don't necessarily need to wait until after death to get the consequences of the choices that we make in this life. So, for example, if you go around telling everybody that the pandemic is a hoax, and then one day you test positive, well, that might be karma ripening in this very life. So we do need to be very, very careful about this, not just expecting that we're going to have everything totally fine in this life, and if there's a future life, it might suck, but who cares? Because karma can ripen tomorrow. Do something bad today, get the bad result tomorrow. The check is in the mail, and there's a negative in front of that number, so be careful. So, next case. It says, what is a commitment that is pleasant now and unpleasant in the future? He says, here, monks, with pleasure and elation, someone kills living beings, and because of killing living beings, they experience pleasure and elation. Same with stealing, lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, useless speech, coveting, aversion, and wrong view. So this is the case of somebody who's doing unwholesome things by body, speech, and mind, and they like it. They enjoy killing, stealing. They enjoy sexual assault. They enjoy infidelity. They enjoy lying, speaking harshly. They enjoy craving. They enjoy aversion. And they enjoy their wrong beliefs. And this is actually quite common. There's a lot of people who take genuine delight in doing unwholesome and harmful things. And there's a lot of people who take delight in their wrong views because their wrong views give them comfort. Again, somebody who rejects moral causality finds comfort in that, in believing, oh, I can do whatever I want and there'll be no consequences. There can be a certain pleasure in that, a certain joy that comes in believing that we're immune to the consequences of our actions. But that actually makes things even worse. That makes things even worse. Because when we take joy in doing unwholesome things, then we're building up in our mind a positive connection with the unwholesome. We're building up in our mind the delusion that unwholesome things are worth doing. At least when we recognize that the unwholesome things we're doing are harmful, even though we still get the harmful karma of doing the unwholesome things. What we are doing is that by recognizing it as harmful and unwholesome and unpleasant, then in the long run, we're reducing our affinity for unwholesome conduct. So that's at least moving in the right general direction. It's much worse, actually, if we take pleasure and delight in doing unwholesome things, because then our inclination towards the unwholesome becomes even stronger. And of course, the consequence is when they're separated from their body after death, they reappear in deprivation, a bad destination, downfall in hell. I should mention, by the way, as I normally do whenever I talk about hell, in Buddhism, hell is temporary. It can last a very long time, but it's always temporary. It eventually comes to an end, and then we're reborn somewhere else. And the good news is there's only one direction to go from the bottom, and that's up. So if you're reborn in the lowest hells on account of doing really horrible things, the good news is when that comes to an end, you're probably going to be reborn somewhere better because there's no other direction to go. So there's always a good side to everything. So then what's a commitment that's unpleasant now and pleasant in the future? Here, monks, with displeasure and depression, someone refrains from killing living beings, from stealing, from sexual misconduct, from telling lies, from speaking divisive speech, from speaking harsh speech, from speaking useless speech. They don't covet, they're not aversive, and they hold right view. But because of these wholesome modes of conduct, they experience displeasure and depression. So for example, you're in the store and you see that big delicious candy bar, but you don't have any money, and you're like, I really want to steal that. I really want to, but I guess I'm just gonna have to deal without it. Oh, dukkha. So much dukkha. Or maybe you're in a monastery and you know you're not supposed to eat in the evening, and you walk in the kitchen and you see somebody just delivered a big chocolate cake, and you're just like, oh, I want to just take that and just stuff it in my face right now. And you're like, oh, but I took the precept of not eating in the evening. Ah, dukkha. Or another example would be somebody asks you if you did something inappropriate, and you realize I can't lie about this. There's no way of getting around this. I'm actually going to have to own up and tell the truth about this. And you really don't want to. It's embarrassing. It's shameful. But you know that's it. It's the right thing to do. So with displeasure and depression, you tell the truth. Okay, so holding right view. Again, believing in moral causality. That's not always a pleasant belief. When we reflect on all the hideous things we've done in our life, and we reflect, wow, that's all going to come back to me. Oh, dear Lord, I have to experience the consequences of all my bad choices? Oh, not necessarily a pleasant thing to think about, but it's inescapable. So this is also pointing to the fact that a commitment to wholesome conduct sometimes doesn't look so great on the surface. Doesn't always seem like the best thing. But if we're aware of the Dhamma, if we're well trained in the Dhamma, then we know that ultimately the results are worth it. And sometimes it actually doesn't take very long. So we see that lovely cake on the counter in the evening, and we remember, yes, but Renunciation is happiness. Renunciation is the happiness of letting go, the happiness of contentment. Renunciation is the reminder that every moment is an opportunity to be happy, unconditionally happy. And in that moment, our perception can shift and happiness can arise. So again, the arising of future positive results doesn't always wait until the next lifetime. It can actually happen in the next moment, the next instant. One moment we're looking at the cake filled with depression because we can't have it. And the next moment we're like, oh, I don't need that cake in order to be happy. I've been well trained in the teachings of the good people, well trained in the teachings of the noble beings. I know that renunciation itself is joy. Contentment is happiness. And right there, all of that displeasure and depression can melt away and be replaced with joy. And then the Buddha says, when they're separated from their body after death, they reappear in a good destination, a heavenly world. So there are also heaven worlds in Buddhism, and they're very nice and they're very pleasant, but they're also temporary. So don't get too stuck on them. While in many places the Buddha does speak about the path to rebirth in heaven, in fact, broadly speaking, you can divide the Buddha's teachings into two categories. The teachings about seeking rebirth in heaven, or positive rebirth, and the teachings about seeking enlightenment. And it's interesting that the Buddha doesn't always give the teachings of enlightenment. Depending on who he was speaking to, he would often simply talk about how to generate good karma that leads to pleasant rebirth. Again, it depended upon his audience. If he was speaking to people who didn't really seem much interested in enlightenment, then he wouldn't talk about it. He would just talk about the path to heaven or the path to a positive human rebirth. But often that was a starting point, which he would then start to lead people to an understanding that there's a happiness better than heaven. There's a happiness better than wealth. There's a happiness better than fame and power. And that's the happiness of awakening, the happiness of equanimity, the happiness of wisdom. And that's what's really worth striving for. But often he would just say what was relevant to his audience at the time. And sometimes that was simply to talk about the path to rebirth in a pleasant location, a pleasant world. But yeah, keeping in mind, the most pleasant experiences are also temporary and eventually come to an end. Only enlightenment is not temporary. And finally, what's a commitment that's pleasant now and pleasant in the future? Here amongst with pleasure and elation, someone refrains from killing, etc., and they hold right view. So the same 10 courses of wholesome conduct, except now we're doing it with joy. It's like, yes, I don't kill, and I love the fact that I don't kill. I don't steal, and it's so delightful not stealing. I speak gently. Well, I try anyway. And it's so delightful to speak gently. My mind is free of covetousness and aversion. And it's so delightful to have contentment instead. So it's taking delight in the wholesome. And also knowing that in the future it brings about pleasant results. So the Buddha says, these are the 4 kinds of commitments. And then he gives a series of similes here. And I've always found these similes to be very apt. Especially the first one, but all 4 of these I find to be very, very potent. He says, monks, it is just as if there was a bitter drink mixed with poison. Then a person would come who wanted to live and did not want to die, who wanted pleasure and avoided pain. That's most people, by the way. Someone would say to them, person, that's a literal translation of the Pali, by the way. They do actually say, hey, person, which I find incredibly delicious. So he says, person, this is a bitter drink mixed with poison. Full disclosure. You can drink it if you want to. As you drink it, you will not enjoy its appearance, its fragrance, or its flavor. And after you drink it, you will die or experience death-like pain. Without considering, they would drink it. They would not reject it. As they drank it, they would not enjoy its appearance, fragrance, or its flavor. And after drinking it, they would die or experience death-like pain. Monks, this is like the commitment which is unpleasant now and unpleasant in the future. So this is the case of, again, so somebody who does unwholesome things, even though it's unpleasant and they don't enjoy it, they do unwholesome things anyway. Again, maybe they've been told that's what they should do, or maybe through some twisted course of logic, they've decided that that's the best way to live their lives, or maybe they're just masochistic. But for whatever reason, this person engages in unwholesome things, even though it's unpleasant. And in the future, they're going to reap terrible consequences. So this is like a bitter drink mixed with poison. It's disgusting, it's unpleasant, and then the after effects are even worse. Next, he says, monks, it is just as if there was an attractive, fragrant, and delicious drink in a bronze cup. Apparently, bronze cups were considered luxurious in the time of the Buddha. These days, do people even use bronze cups anymore? No. Bronze these days is quite common, but back then it was considered quite fancy. So there was an attractive, fragrant, and delicious drink in a bronze cup, but it was mixed with poison. Then a person would come who wanted to live and did not want to die, who wanted pleasure and avoided pain. Someone would say to them, person, this is an attractive, fragrant, and delicious drink in a bronze cup, but it is mixed with poison. We call that wine, by the way. Attractive, fragrant, and delicious, but it's poison. You can drink it if you want to. As you drink it, you will enjoy its appearance, its fragrance, and its flavor. But after you drink it, you will die or experience death-like pain. Without considering, they would drink it. They would not reject it. As they drank it, they would enjoy its appearance, its fragrance, and its flavor. But after drinking it, they would die or experience death-like pain. Monks, this is like the commitment which is pleasant now and unpleasant in the future. So this actually is the case for many people in the world. This is the example he gave of when one is breaking the precepts, doing unwholesome things with body, speech, and mind, and enjoying doing these unwholesome things. This is the case for many people in the world because they see the short-term benefits. They're like, well, if I steal that, then I'll have it. And it's nice to have things that I want. I enjoy having things that I want, so I'm going to steal it. So it's enjoying doing unwholesome things. Or we're like, oh, that person's cute. I know I'm already married, but dang, that person's cute. And we go and we try to get with them. Or it's like, wow, I really hate this person. I'm going to tell them off in a really harsh way because it feels great to speak harshly to people you hate. It feels delicious. Just like the delicious drink mixed with poison. We like it going down, but we don't like the after effects. So this is the case for much of the world. Joyfully, with delight, they engage in self-destructive behavior. Joyfully, with delight, they accumulate bad karma and swell the cemeteries, as the Buddha says in other suttas. Oops. Okay, and the next one. He says, monks, it is just as if there was a fermented decoction mixed with medicine. Then a person would come who was diseased. Someone would say to them, person, this fermented decoction is mixed with medicine. You can drink it if you want to. As you drink it, you will not enjoy its appearance, its fragrance, or its flavor. After you drink it, you will feel good. So this is the case with, especially before the invention of pills, medicines often took the form of these horrifically bitter, unpleasant decoctions. So medicinal teas made from horrifically tasting herbs and roots. And you would drink it and it would be terrible and you would hate it. But then the medicinal effect would start to kick in and you would start to feel better. Your illness would start to subside and things would improve. So this is the case of somebody who they encounter the teachings on the wholesome courses of conduct, wholesome physical, verbal, and mental action. And they're like, oh, seriously? Do I have to? I have to stop killing people? This sucks. I have to stop drinking alcohol? Who comes up with these rules? I don't like this. I have to speak gently to people? This is so dumb. I hate it. But then we start taking on these courses of wholesome action, and we realize that it makes our mind a much more pleasant place to be. It makes our life a much more pleasant life to live. Maybe in the beginning, it doesn't seem like such a great thing. But the more we commit to it, the more we train in it, the more we start to discover a pervasive sense of peace and happiness that spreads throughout our life. And of course, the long-term consequences as well are good. It leads to rebirth in a pleasant world, in pleasant conditions. So again, we can see the benefits both in this life and in future lives. So even though at first glance, the medicine of wholesome conduct doesn't always seem so appealing, as we take the medicine, we start to feel good. We start to feel better. And finally, the case, he says, monks, it is just as if there was a mixture of curds, honey, ghee, and molasses. Sounds delicious. Then a person with dysentery came. Someone would say to them, person, this is a mixture of curds, honey, ghee, and molasses. You can drink it if you want to. As you drink it, you will enjoy its appearance, its fragrance, and its flavor. After you drink it, you will feel good. Apparently, this was a treatment for dysentery back in the day. A mixture of curds, honey, ghee, and molasses. Interesting. After considering, they would drink it. They would not reject it. I mean, who would reject that? Even if you're not sick, I would be like, sure, I'll take that. As they drank it, they would enjoy its appearance, its fragrance, and its flavor. And after drinking it, they would feel good. Monks, this is like the commitment, which is pleasant now and pleasant in the future. And actually, the more we become accustomed to the Dhamma, the more this is what our experience is like. Maybe in the beginning, the practice of the Dhamma seems like giving up the good things in our life, doing things that we don't want to do and avoiding things that we want to do. Maybe that's what it seems like in the beginning. But the more we practice the Dhamma, the more we start to develop a taste for the flavor of peace. The more we develop a taste for the flavor of compassion, for the flavor of clarity. The more we appreciate the feeling of wholesomeness in the mind. And then it's not such a struggle anymore. It becomes natural to do what's right and to avoid what's wrong. And then the Buddha ends with a brief simile. He says, monks, just as in the last month of summer at the beginning of autumn, when the sky is clear and cloudless, the rising sun drives away all darkness and brightens, warms, and illuminates. In the same way, monks, the commitment which is pleasant now and pleasant in the future drives away the teachings of ordinary contemplatives and priests and brightens, warms, and illuminates. In other words, the Buddha is pointing to the fact that when we joyfully commit to wholesome conduct, then that builds up our faith and confidence to the Dhamma. And we see that the teachings which are outside the Dhamma are just darkness and gloom. They're not something which leads in the right direction. So naturally, it's blown away from our mind. Our mind doesn't incline in those dark directions any longer. This is what the Fortunate One said. Satisfied, those monks delighted in the Fortunate One's speech. So that's the end of the sutta. So pretty straightforward discourse. At this time, if you have any questions, please go ahead and I'll answer as best I can.
Thank you, Bhante, for sharing. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let's see. All right, so welcome to Oh, actually, no new friends joining in. At least no one, no one who typed anything in
Welcome
anyway.
to no one.
But Gita said, very nice to have you back, Bhante Suddhaso. Hope you had a fruitful retreat. Yen saying good morning to everyone. And then Michael said, this morning a friend of mine expressed glee at the news that the president contracted COVID. I suggested wishing him well, but she replied, no way, that deserves it. Let me have my 10 minutes of joy. But Michael says how relevant this is, though, to our sutta today.
Yeah, so this is actually a difficult situation when there's somebody who is causing a lot of harm in the world, somebody who's causing a lot of pain and misery to a lot of people. And then a circumstance arises which is causing pain and misery to that person, but which might lead to the reduction in the harm that they're having in the world. So in that case, it's fine to rejoice in the possibility that that person may do less harm to the world. That's okay. It is not fine to rejoice that that person is experiencing pain and misery. So the proper thing in this case is to wish, may that person stop hurting hundreds of millions of others, and may he be happy. So keeping in mind that the wish of metta is may everyone be happy, not may everyone accept him. That's not metta. It's a very limited form of metta mixed in with aversion. So it's wishing, may everyone be happy. So you might wish, for example, may that particular harmful person stop harming others. That's a great wish. But we should not rejoice in the suffering of any living being, because that's how you wind up being the one who harms others. Why would somebody willingly make choices that hurts hundreds of millions of people? It's because they like doing it. Or because they're foolish and they don't see the negative consequences of what they're doing, as we saw in this sutta. So if we cultivate joy in the suffering of others, then that increases the likelihood that we will willingly inflict suffering on others. And also, elsewhere in the suttas, the Buddha also makes it clear that rejoicing in the suffering of others is also an unwholesome mental activity. Approving of the suffering of others is an unwholesome activity, which generates bad karma, which is productive of harmful consequences. So no, it is not proper to rejoice in the suffering of that person. But it is proper to hope that these conditions will lead to a reduction of suffering for hundreds of millions of people. That is proper.
Thank you, Bhante. And then Michael says, this is a powerful teaching, recognizing that the one I should listen to and the one I should not listen to, by way of teaching, is for me sometimes difficult. I go to the teacher whose behavior and speech point to a strong practice. I tend to move away from those who, despite their vast knowledge, their speech and behavior don't reflect it. But maybe I'm not in a position to truly see the difference between the two.
So one thing that's worth doing when evaluating teachers is to look for their strong points and rejoice in their strong points and learn what you can from their strong points, while also recognizing their weak points and not allowing their weak points to influence you in the wrong direction. So this is one reason why it's useful to have multiple teachers instead of only one. If you have only one teacher, then you'll take on the good and the bad together. If you have multiple teachers, then you can take like the good parts of this teacher and the good parts of that teacher and the good parts of the other teacher and put them together to a complete package, which is much more effective than what you get from just a single teacher. So I wouldn't reject a teacher. If you know that they have good qualities in some areas and bad qualities in others, don't reject them entirely. Just reject their bad qualities. and see what you can learn from their good qualities. Okay?
Okay. And Gita has a comment. I don't remember what it was in reference to, but you said, it's very funny. But we can agree that karma can happen in this very life. May we all develop wholesome actions and practice of the good Dhamma. And then Sarah said, her practice is developing, fortunately, but so much dukkha. I think this is me. So she was probably referring to unpleasant now, but pleasant in the future. And then Gita says you can still purchase bronze in India and Sri Lanka. Apparently they have some health benefits. And then Tuli asks, are the miseries of the world, such as abject poverty, racial injustice, rape, etc., the result of karma?
So this is a complex question, which is dangerous to give a direct one-sided yes or no answer to, because a direct one-sided question tends to be misunderstood. So the Buddha said that there's 4 kinds of questions. The kinds that are to be answered directly with a yes or no answer, the kinds that are to be answered after careful analysis of the question, the kinds that are to be answered with a counter question, and the kinds which are not to be answered. So 4 kinds of questions. And I would say that this question is the kind that needs to be answered after careful analysis. So briefly, again, giving a brief answer is dangerous. We should probably just have a whole Dhamma talk on this subject, to be perfectly honest. Mm-hmm. I can't think of a safe way to give a short answer. We should just have a whole Dhamma talk on the subject.
Coming soon.
Yeah. We can fast track it.
Yeah, I have to respect the Buddha's advice. The Buddha was very clear, do not give a one-sided answer to a question that requires analysis. So I have to respect the Buddha's teaching on that. So wait for the full explanation.
And then Elaine says you should run for president.
Dear Lord, no. Gosh, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Do you realize how much dukkha there is in that office? Okay, so the Buddha speaks about the righteous monarch, Dhamma Raja, Chakravarti, the righteous monarch. Those people are extremely rare. It's extremely rare to have somebody who has the perfect qualities to make the perfect righteous monarch, the perfect righteous government leader. They're exceedingly rare. Most people, they lack the wisdom, they lack the self-control, they lack the understanding. And the people who have the wisdom and self-control and understanding usually stay far away from political office. So it's very rare to find somebody who winds up at the top of a government office and also is fit to be in that position. Very rare. I would not willingly enter that office. I'd have to be forced into it. It's actually one of the deep ironies, which is that the very people that should be in political office are the ones that don't want to be there. I'm not saying I should be in political office, but I definitely don't want to be. Okay.
Then lots of people were thankful for your response about what Michael shared with the friend that delighted in someone else's suffering. And then Tuli asks, how do you generate the energy and passion necessary for public outrage and social justice when we're trying to develop equanimity?
Because we're not developing equanimity as a standalone quality. Equanimity is a quality which is developed together with compassion, together with wisdom, and together with a sincere commitment to doing what is right, to doing what is moral, to doing what is wholesome. So equanimity without these other qualities, that can result in inaction. But that's not the way of Buddhism. Buddhism is not the way of inaction. Buddhism is the way of wisdom and compassion. Buddhism is a way of wholesome activity. So you recognize that something is unwholesome, and you ask, what can I do to help? And you do what you can to help. That's Buddhism. Outrage, though, is a difficult word to incorporate into Buddhism, because outrage implies a negative mindset. It's right there in the word rage. Outrage. That's not a Buddhist attitude. The Buddhist attitude is the calm, wise recognition. Harm is being done, and I will try to do something about it. So this is done with a peaceful mind, a joyful mind, a mind that delights in the wholesome, a mind that delights in the opportunity to help others. Okay?
Right. And then John T. Inscrutable says, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. Do we know this? What is this?
It doesn't sound.
No.
I don't know.
Well, whoever you are, they're saying, thank you, Bhante. This was a much needed discourse. It could probably be useful to be reminded of these points regularly, and may you be one of our teachers for some time. Your response to Michael was spot on. It's easy to bear bad feelings towards someone we perceive as bad when they fall in hard times. But it is then good that they may be most open to good behavior at that time. Funny, it was once considered to be the greatest achievement to become president. Now who wants it? Okay. And Elaine says, I know you don't want to be political, but you're so wise.
Next.
And John T. Inscrutable says, my thought has always been that those who seek position of power should never be allowed to hold such. And then lots of gratitude from Gita and others. Oh, last minute question from Sienna. So is this like Christianity where even your thoughts alone can produce negative karma?
I'm not the best person to ask about Christianity, because I've learned that the form of Christianity I was raised with is apparently quite divergent from what's actually in the Bible. So I'm really not the best person to ask about Christianity. But yeah, in Buddhism, what you do with your mind also creates karma. In fact, in a few places in the suttas, the Buddha emphasizes that mental karma is the most important. Because mental karma is the basis for all other karma. What we do with our mind determines what we do with our body and our speech. So we need to be extremely careful what we do with our mind. Another teaching in Buddhism is that ultimately everything is mind. Everything is created by the mind. Everything is contained within the mind. So mental karma is karma. Everything is mental karma. So what we do with our thoughts is extremely important. What we do with our emotions, with our responses internally is extremely important. So we do need to train our mind to carefully watch what decisions we make with our mind in each moment. Okay.
Right. And Eleanor also asks, how can we stay truthful without hurting people? If someone asks, do you like my haircut? And you don't know how one should answer. Sorry for the bad and shallow example.
Yeah, so being honest doesn't mean that you have to tell the complete, entire truth at all times in every circumstance. So the Buddha gives a number of helpful pieces of advice. So of course we shouldn't say something that isn't true. But we also should only speak when it is beneficial and when it's the right time. So this is a very basic set of 3 principles to keep in mind. Is it true? Is it beneficial? Is it the right time? Those are your basic guidelines for any speech of any sort. So if somebody says, do you like my new haircut? Well, maybe the answer in your mind is, no, I don't like it. But is that beneficial? Is that really going to do any good? maybe the proper thing to ask is, how do you feel about your haircut? What inspired you to get that haircut? Or you might say like, oh, it looks like you're really enjoying this new look that you're having. It's so delightful to see how happy you are. Or find some way to answer the question which doesn't involve a yes or no answer. Make it into a question about them, perhaps. Find some way to turn it around. So often when somebody asks a question like that, they're not actually asking whether or not you like their haircut. They're asking you to pay attention to them. They're asking you to show an interest in them. So do that. Show an interest in them. Pay attention to them. Treat them as though they're valuable, as though they're important. And often you'll find that that's what they're really after. It's not so much about their haircut. It's about feeling valued. So try to look behind the words, what's really going on. But sometimes actually you do need to say the truth as it is. In the Abhaya Rajakumara Sutta, as well as a few other places, the Buddha says that sometimes it is the proper thing to say something that is displeasing. Sometimes it is proper to say something that is disagreeable, but only if it's true, if it's beneficial, and if it's the right time. But that takes wisdom of knowing when that is. So when in doubt, don't say what's displeasing. But if you're completely certain that it's true, it's beneficial, and it's the right time, then be careful, because you're delusional and you're probably wrong. But maybe that's the right time to say something displeasing. Maybe. Okay.
All right. And hopefully, well, not hopefully, but since we're running over time, this will be the last question. So Sienna asks, can you speak about right thought then?
Yeah, briefly, it's thinking thoughts of contentment, thoughts of goodwill, thoughts of compassion, and thoughts connected to wisdom. So thoughts of impermanence, thoughts of letting go, thoughts of mindfulness, thoughts of discernment. Yeah, that's right thought. Okay.
Great. I think that's a good place to end. So thanks everyone for joining us this morning. Always good to see everyone. It was very lively and active today. So that's great. So join us tonight for Monk Chat at 7:30 p.m. So you can bring all your unasked but related questions and all of your unasked but not related questions to the Sutta. But anything somewhat related to Buddhism is welcome. So hopefully we'll see you all then. So we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. All right, everyone, and have a great day.